I've always been an on and off reader, but this year I decided to make reading every day a habit. And it changed me in a way that I didn't expect. I'm going to walk you through the three main changes I've noticed, and then at the end, I'll show you how I incorporated this habit into my routine and made it stick. Let's get into it. Reading helped me wean off information overload. I was watching a Dan Koe video the other day, and he said something that caught my attention. People think they're bored when they're actually overstimulated. Consider how common it is for people to wake up, scroll social media, make coffee, scroll social media again, take a shower, listen to a podcast, drive to work while listening to the same podcast, maybe listen to music while they work, scroll social media again at lunch, go for an evening walk, maybe listen to an audiobook, eat dinner in front of the TV, and then watch YouTube in bed. That is an insane amount of input and stimulation. It's more information than can really be processed by the brain. And if you only leave room for input, there will be no meaningful output. I've noticed that my brain becomes accustomed to the amount of input I take in. If I'm going through a phase of watching a lot of YouTube or listening to a lot of music, then watching and listening become my default. That becomes my normal. If I go for a run without something in my ear, something feels off and dull. Reaching for my earbuds then becomes reflexive. But oddly, if I spend a lot of time in quiet, reading, writing, maybe doing chores without listening to something, then going for a run without music or a podcast feels normal, not empty, not boring or dull. It's kind of like if you get used to eating a lot of candy or ice cream or other sugary foods, then you wouldn't necessarily appreciate a strawberry. I'm not saying you would dislike it, but it wouldn't taste sweet to you. But strawberries are sweet. It's just that your senses are unable to register the sweetness because they're so accustomed to an exaggerated amount of sweetness. And I think the same thing can happen with the information, the stimulation we get from our phones. If having a meal or going for a walk without looking at a screen or listening to something feels boring, it might not actually be boredom that you're experiencing. It may be that your brain is too loud or restless or keyed up on the constant dopamine releasing input that it's accustomed to getting. It might be that your brain just craves more of the same. In that state, no one would be able to recognize or appreciate the slower, quieter, more subtle aspects of experience. But again, that's your perception. That doesn't mean reality itself is boring. This is where reading came in for me. When I made a habit of reading every day, it forced my mind to slow down and tolerate slower moving, more cognitively demanding input for an extended period of time. At first, reading felt effortful. It wasn't a negative experience, but it felt like a task to sit down and concentrate long enough to read a couple of chapters in a book. After a couple weeks, though, something shifted. Concentration and focus clicked into place quicker, and reading felt relaxing, almost like a mental massage. I don't know, that sounds weird. I bet it's some form of flow state, and I can see why some people become such voracious readers because it's a pleasant state to be in once you get used to it. And the slower pace and focus you develop through reading leaks into the rest of your day. Your brain becomes accustomed to slower input and less of it. Your sense of normal shifts, so that time away from screens no longer feels boring. It's stimulating and engaging just to be in your surroundings, to move your body and just think. Or not think and just be. Reading cleared away for more creative output. Once my brain became used to stretches of time without input, I had a bunch of time to think and write and process the information I was taking in. I still use social media, of course. I watch YouTube and Netflix, but I'm much more selective. I spend a lot of time mentally metabolizing what I've read or watched or heard. And that process leads to a lot of my own thinking and creative output. The most obvious example is that I've been reading this fantasy series called A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I'm completely swept up in the story, these characters, the world the author has built, and I find myself thinking a lot about the themes in the story, what really draws me in, what I like about the storytelling, and then also what I find a little bit inconsistent, what I would change if I could. And because I had the time and mental space to really articulate what I think about these books, I ended up making a series of videos where I talk about those thoughts and I put them out into the world. In case you're also an ACOTAR fan, I will link the playlist of those videos above. And I know this is a small, silly example, but that creative output would not have happened if I hadn't first trained my mind to slow down, consume less, and fully digest what I was taking in. And I actually think it was reading that trained my brain to do that. To put it simply, if you want to think independently and creatively, you have to tolerate long periods of time just thinking. Reading told me better stories than I was telling myself. This may be the biggest one. When you read, it's like you take the perspective of another person or character. You borrow their mind or their story. We are all constantly repeating a story to ourselves about who we are in the world we live in. Every day, all the time. And I think it goes without saying that life is unfair. Some people are dealt circumstances that cause them to struggle and suffer, while other people have it easy. But consider two people whose circumstances, advantages, disadvantages are otherwise equal. One person tells themselves the story that they are unworthy, unlovable, incapable, and that maybe they just pulled the short straw in life and there's nothing they can do about it. The other person wakes up every day believing that they are worthy, lovable, capable, and that the life they want is just a matter of learning the right skills and figuring out the right strategy to transform their circumstance into the one of their dreams. It is indisputable that some of the stories we tell ourselves cause us to suffer, and some of them contribute to our well-being. There are better and worse stories to tell. And this matters because people treat themselves and others, the world around them, in a way that flows from the logic of the story that's playing out in their head. They make decisions, they react to their circumstances in a way that aligns with that story. And then the world responds in kind. The story you tell yourself is like the first domino you push in a whole chain of cause and effect that determines the quality and outcome of your life. The tricky part is that the story we tell ourselves is like the atmosphere we walk through or breathe. It's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. It's really hard to identify one thing when there's nothing else to compare it to, when it's the only thing that you might have ever known. It reminds me of this story that David Foster Wallace told in a commencement speech. It's about two fish swimming in the ocean. An older fish swims by and says, "The water's nice today, isn't it?" And the two younger fish look at each other puzzled and ask, "What's water?" That's what your internal story can be like. It's so close to you, so constant, so embedded in your experience that you don't even see it. But when you read, something remarkable happens. You get a temporary implant of someone else's story. And I think this does two things. One, it makes you aware of your own story, like someone pointing out water to a fish. And two, it gives you access to a larger, more meaningful, more exhilarating story, like a hero's journey that has the effect of allowing you to see yourself in a different light from a more zoomed out perspective. I think reading a character's hero's journey wakes up your own hero's journey. I guess I'm surprised that reading altered my brain in ways that didn't just have to do with the content of what I was reading. Reading has turned me into a better thinker. It honed the mental muscles that help me focus, take in more cognitively demanding input, and then tolerate less input, more solitude, and more quiet, so that I can actually figure out what I think and then put that out into the world. So that's what changed. But this is how I actually built the habit. I set out to read for 1 hour every day for a year, and I'm on day 91 today. Some days I only get 30 minutes in, but most days I read for much longer than an hour. I built the habit by adding it to my morning routine. In particular, when I drink my morning coffee, I read. I'm never not going to drink my morning coffee, so I stacked the new habit onto the pre-existing one. This method is called habit stacking, and I learned it from the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, which should be required reading for everyone. And even though I didn't initially plan to build this part of the habit, I end up reading at night too, right before I go to bed, just because I love it and it helps me wind down and fall asleep. Okay, that's all I have for now. Please like and subscribe while you're here, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you so much for being here.